My mother used to say I had her eyes. What she meant was that she owned them. She would say it at dinner parties, at parent-teacher conferences, at the grocery store when we ran into someone from her book club. Sloane has my eyes, and then she would touch my face, not gently, the way you check a melon for ripeness, and the person she was talking to would nod and smile and say, "Oh yes, I see it." Even though my eyes are brown and hers are green, and the only thing we have ever truly shared is the ability to look at someone and see what they are worth to us. I am Sloane. I am 34 years old. I write stories for a living, or at least I used to, before I moved back into the house where I learned that love is just control wearing a softer dress. I used to have an apartment in Chicago with windows that faced the lake and a girlfriend named Alina who laughed like breaking glass and a manuscript due to my publisher that was going to change everything. I used to have a life that was mine. Then my mother had a stroke. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you are new here, my name is Sloane, and this is the place where we talk about the mothers who raise us, the mothers who bury us, and the mothers who look so much like love that we forget to check for the teeth underneath. If you have ever moved back home because blood called you back, if you have ever swallowed your own voice because someone convinced you it was too loud, stay. Subscribe, because the story I am about to tell you is not about forgiveness. It is about the moment you stop apologizing for surviving. Here's my story. The call came at 2:00 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. I was awake, because I am always awake at 2:00 a.m. when I am writing, because the world is quieter then, and the characters in my head stop arguing long enough to let me hear what they are trying to say. Alina was asleep in the bedroom, her breathing steady, the sound of a life that did not need my permission to exist. My brother, Derek, was on the line. He lives in Portland, which is far enough from our mother's house in Ohio that he can pretend the distance is accidental. Mom had a stroke, he said. No preamble. Derek has never been good at padding the blow, it's mild. The doctors say she'll recover, but she needs someone there, full-time, for a while. I remember looking at my laptop screen. I had written 4,000 words that night, the best chapter of the novel, the one where the protagonist finally realizes that the monster in her childhood home was not a ghost but her own reflection, raised by someone who hated mirrors. I remember thinking, I cannot leave this, I cannot leave her. I did not know then which her I meant. How long is a while, I asked. They don't know, a few months, maybe 6 months. I had a deadline in 4. Alina and I had planned a trip to Mexico in May. I had a life that was finally, after years of scraping and starving and writing in subway stations, starting to look like the one I had imagined when I was 16 and reading novels under my blanket with a flashlight. I'll call her in the morning, I said. She's asking for you, Sloane, not me. You, that was the hook and I bit it, because my mother had never asked for me. She had demanded me, expected me, borrowed me, used me, but she had never asked. And in that small word asking, I heard something that sounded like need, and need to a daughter raised on starvation tastes exactly like love. I packed a bag. I told Alina it was temporary. I told my agent I needed an extension. I told myself that I was being a good daughter, that this was what family did, that 6 months was nothing in the span of a life. I got on a plane. I did not know that my mother had already packed the trap, and that I was walking into it with my eyes wide open, carrying my own suitcase. The house on Maple Street had not changed in 20 years. Same yellow siding, same porch swing that creaked in a specific rhythm, same smell of lavender and old paper that hit me like a fist when I opened the door. My mother was in the living room, in the recliner that had been my father's before he left, before he died, before he became just a name she used to explain why she was the way she was. She looked smaller. That was the first thing I noticed. The stroke had taken something from her right side, a slight drag to her hand, a softness to her face that made her look, for the first time in my life, like someone who could be hurt. Sloane, she said, and her voice was thin, fragile, a violin string about to snap. You came. Of course I came, I said, and I knelt beside her chair and I took her hand and I felt the familiar shape of her bones and I thought, I can do this. I can be kind. I can be the daughter she needs. I was so stupid. I was so desperately, beautifully stupid. The first week was almost peaceful. I cooked her meals, helped her with the exercises the physical therapist had assigned, drove her to follow-up appointments where doctors spoke in gentle tones about excellent prognosis and remarkable resilience. My mother was compliant, grateful, even tender. She thanked me for the soup. She asked about my writing, something she had not done since I published my first short story at 22, and she told me it was cute. But when are you going to get a real job? I've missed you, she said one night as I was helping her into bed. Having you here, it reminds me of when you were little. I should have heard the warning. I should have remembered that my mother never missed people, she missed their utility. But I was tired and I was lonely, and I wanted so badly to believe that this crisis had changed her, that the stroke had washed away the sharp edges and left someone I could finally love without bleeding. I was wrong. It started with the notebooks. I write longhand. Always have. There is something about the physical act of pen on paper that connects me to the story in a way a keyboard never has. I had brought 3 notebooks with me, the ones containing the draft of my novel, the one about the girl and the mirror, and the mother who could not see her own reflection. I kept them in my bedroom, the room that had been mine as a teenager, still painted the pale blue I had chosen at 14, still smelling of the vanilla candles I had burned to cover the scent of my mother's disapproval. I woke up one morning and one of them was gone. I searched the room. Under the bed, in the closet, in the bathroom where I had left it the night before while brushing my teeth. Nothing. I asked my mother if she had seen it. "Oh, that old thing," she said from her chair, not looking up from the crossword puzzle she was doing. I threw it out. The pages were all scribbled. I thought it was trash. My blood went cold. "Mom, that was my manuscript, my novel." She waved her hand, the one that still worked perfectly. "Don't be dramatic, Sloane, it was a mess. You'll write another one, you always do." I went to the kitchen trash can. It was empty. She had taken it out already, or had Derek take it out when he called, or had simply hidden it somewhere I would not find. I stood in the kitchen, my hands shaking, and I felt something crack inside me, something that had been holding since I was 12, and she told me my poetry was embarrassing and burned it in the backyard grill. But I swallowed it, because she was sick, because she had had a stroke, because good daughters do not scream at their mothers when their mothers are recovering from a stroke. I went to my room. I opened a new notebook. I started again. The second notebook disappeared a week later. I found it in the fireplace, half-burned, the pages curled and blackened, my handwriting reduced to ash. "Mom," I said, and my voice was steady only because I was holding it so tightly it was turning blue. "Why are you burning my work?" She looked at me with those green eyes, the ones I did not have, the ones that saw everything and reflected nothing. I was cold, Sloane. The house is drafty. I didn't realize it was important. It had my name on the cover. Did it? I didn't notice. My vision isn't what it used to be, you know, the stroke. She touched her temple, a gesture she had perfected, the delicate invalid, the wounded queen. You can't expect me to remember everything. I'm doing my best. I bought a lock for my bedroom door. I installed it while she was napping, the screwdriver slipping in my sweaty palm, my heart hammering against my ribs like a bird trying to escape a cage. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself she was confused, that the stroke had affected her memory, her judgment, her ability to understand that other people's work was not kindling. I told myself a lot of things. I was very good at it. She had trained me for 3 to 4 years. The arguments began in April. They did not start as arguments. They started as conversations, the way a fire starts as a spark. My mother would say something, a comment about my weight, my hair, the way I dressed, and I would feel the old anger rise up in my throat, and I would swallow it. Because she was sick, because she was trying, because I was the one who had chosen to come back and I did not get to complain about the temperature of the water I had jumped into. But the water was boiling. "Sloane, you've gained weight," she said one morning as I was making her oatmeal. "Chicago must be treating you well, or poorly. It's hard to tell with you." "I've been stressiating," I said, not turning around. "The deadline, the move, it's a lot. Stressiating." She laughed, that sharp, musical sound that had always made me feel like I was the punchline to a joke I did not understand. "You always did have such little discipline. Your father was the same way, emotional, sloppy, it's why he never amounted to much." I gripped the spoon so hard my knuckles turned white. "Dad was a good man. He was a weak man. He left, didn't he, or did he die? I can never remember which story you prefer." She paused. "Probably the leaving. You always did romanticize abandonment." I set the oatmeal on the table. I did not sit down. I stood in the kitchen doorway and I looked at her, eating her breakfast with the perfect posture she had learned in finishing school, and I felt the anger like a physical thing, a fist in my chest, and I said, "I'm going for a walk." "Don't be long." "I have physical therapy at 10, and you know I can't drive." "I know." I walked for 2 hours. I walked until my feet hurt and my lungs burned and I could not feel my face from the cold Ohio wind. I called Alina from a park bench, and she answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep because it was still early in Chicago. "How is it?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "She's recovering. It's fine." "Sloan." Elena knew my voice the way you know a song you have heard 1,000 times. She knew every note, every pause, every lie. What did she do? Nothing. She's difficult, but she's sick. I have to remember that. You don't have to remember anything that erases you. I cried then on that bench in the middle of a park where children were playing and dogs were running and the world was continuing without me. I cried because Elena was right, and because I did not know how to be right, and because my mother was in that house, eating her oatmeal, and I was out here, falling apart, and somehow I was still the one who felt guilty. "I'll be home soon," I lied. "I love you," Elena said, and she meant it, and that made it worse. I went back. I always went back. The arguments escalated. That is what arguments do when one person is not allowed to leave. My mother learned the rhythm of me. She learned that I would swallow 3 insults before I choked on the 4th. She learned that I would apologize even when I had done nothing wrong, that I would cook her favorite meals even when she complained about them, that I would sit in silence while she told stories about my childhood that were not true, stories where she was the hero and I was the difficult child, the ungrateful daughter, the one who had always needed too much. "You were such a needy baby," she would say to the neighbors who came by with casseroles I did not eat. Always crying. Always wanting to be held. I could never get anything done. I was colicky. I was a baby. I cried because I was in pain, and she left me in my crib for hours because she read in a book that picking me up would spoil me. I learned this from my aunt, years later, the one my mother stopped speaking to because she told me the truth. But I did not correct her. I stood in the kitchen, washing dishes that were already clean, and I listened to her rewrite my history, and I felt myself getting smaller, until I was the size of the child she was describing, a child who did not exist except in her stories. "Sloan doesn't have many friends," she told Mrs. Gable from next door. "She's always been a loner, too sensitive, takes everything personally." "I have friends," I said from the sink. "Oh, you do?" My mother turned to me, her eyes bright with challenge. "Name 3. Elena, my agent, my editor, Elena," she laughed. "Is that what we're calling her now, your friend?" Mrs. Gable looked at the floor. I looked at the water in the sink, the way it ran over my hands, carrying soap and dirt and something else, something I could not name. "Mom," I said, and my voice was barely audible. Please what? I'm just making conversation. You always were so touchy. It's why people don't like you, Sloan. You make everything so heavy." I went to my room. I locked the door. I sat on the bed and I stared at the wall and I thought about the novel I was not writing, the life I was not living, the woman in Chicago who was probably eating breakfast alone and wondering if I was ever coming back. My mother knocked on the door an hour later. "Sloan, are you angry?" "Sloan, I was joking. You know I joke. You can't take everything so seriously. It's exhausting." I did not answer. She knocked for 5 minutes 10, her voice rising from contrition to frustration to anger. "Fine, be dramatic. That's what you're best at, isn't it, making scenes? I'll just sit here alone, in pain, while you sulk like a teenager." I heard her walk away, her steps deliberate, the slight drag of her affected leg exaggerated now, a performance for an audience of one. I pressed my face into my pillow and I screamed, a soundless scream, the kind that tears your throat without making a sound, the kind I had perfected in this same room when I was 15, and she told me my first boyfriend was beneath me until I believed her and broke up with him. I was 34 years old and I was still screaming into pillows. The night I found the emails, I was looking for a phone charger. My mother had taken mine, borrowed it and forgotten to return it, the way she forgot everything that did not serve her. Her laptop was on the kitchen table, open, the screen glowing in the dark house. She was asleep, or pretending to be asleep, her door closed, her breathing audible even from down the hall. I told myself I was not snooping. I told myself I just needed the charger, that I would close the laptop as soon as I found it. But the screen was open to her email, and the subject line was my name. "Sloan, manuscript sample, urgent." I should have closed it. I know I should have closed it. But I was tired, and I was angry, and I had spent 3 months being the good daughter while she burned my work and insulted my life and turned my name into a joke for the neighbors. So I clicked. The email was to an editor I did not know, at a publishing house I had never heard of. The attachment was a PDF. The message read, "Attached is the first 3 chapters of my new novel, written under a pseudonym. I would prefer to keep my identity private for now, but I believe this work speaks for itself. I look forward to your thoughts." I opened the PDF. It was my novel, Not the one I was trying to rewrite, the original, the one from the notebooks she had burned. Word for word, scene for scene, my characters, my dialogue, my metaphors, the story about the girl and the mirror and the mother who could not see her own reflection. She had copied it before she burned it. She had typed it up, and she was sending it to publishers under a pseudonym, claiming it as her own. My hands shook so hard I could barely scroll. There were other emails, dozens of them. To my agent, pretending to be me, canceling meetings. To Alina, sent from a fake account, telling her I had decided to stay in Ohio permanently and that our relationship had been a phase. To my publisher, requesting an extension I had never asked for, using language that made me sound unstable, overwhelmed, unable to handle my career. She had been inside my life, dismantling it piece by piece, while I made her oatmeal and drove her to therapy and apologized for being too sensitive. I read the last email she had sent. It was to a gossip blog. My daughter Sloane has been struggling with some issues since she moved home. I'm worried about her mental state. She's become paranoid, accusatory. She claims I'm stealing her work, which is absurd. I'm just a sick old woman trying to recover. If you hear anything about her, please understand she's not well. I closed the laptop. I stood in the dark kitchen, my mother's house around me, the house where I had learned that love was conditional and conditional love was just control with better lighting. I felt something shift inside me, a tectonic plate moving, a fault line finally giving way. I was not angry anymore. Anger is hot and I was cold, I was ice. I was the winter that comes after a long autumn of pretending the leaves are not falling. I went to my room. I did not sleep, I planned. I spent the next 2 weeks being the perfect daughter. I cooked her meals. I drove her to appointments. I smiled at the neighbors and apologized for my moods and told my mother she was right. I was too sensitive, I was dramatic, I was everything she had always said I was. She ate it up. Of course she did. She had been starving for this, for my submission, my return to the role she had written for me. The difficult daughter, finally broken. The ungrateful child, finally grateful. I knew you'd come around, she said one night, as I was helping her into bed. You always do. You're so much like your father. All that emotion, no stamina. I am like him, I agreed, tucking the blanket around her legs, but I'm learning. She smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. I stood in the dark of her room and I watched her sleep, and I thought about all the nights I had cried in this house, all the stories she had rewritten, all the love I had given her that she had used as fuel for her own fire. I was done burning. I started with the house. What my mother did not know, what no one knew, was that I had bought the house on Maple Street 3 years ago. When the market crashed and the property values plummeted, when my mother was talking about selling and moving to a condo, I had purchased it through a shell company, paid off the mortgage, and let her continue living there as a tenant. I told myself it was an investment. I told myself it was practical, but some part of me, the part that wrote stories about girls and mirrors, knew that I was buying the battlefield so that one day I could choose the terms of the war. I contacted a lawyer. A good one from Chicago, someone who owed me a favor because I had helped her sister get a book deal. I explained what I needed. She did not ask why, she just made it happen. Then I called Alina. Come to Ohio, I said. Are you okay? She asked, and I could hear the worry in her voice. The months of distance, the emails she had sent that I had never answered because my mother had been intercepting them. I'm better than okay, I said. I need you to come, and I need you to bring someone, who, my agent and Dr. Holloway, the neurologist from the hospital where my mother was treated. There was a long pause. Sloane, what is going on? I'm having a dinner party, I said, and my mother is going to be the guest of honor. Alina arrived on Friday. She looked tired, thinner than I remembered, but her eyes were the same, dark and sharp and seeing everything. She hugged me in the driveway and I felt her ribs under my hands, and I realized how much I had missed her, how much my mother had stolen from me, and the cold inside me cracked just slightly, enough to let in a thin stream of warmth. Tell me everything, she said. I did. In the kitchen, while my mother was at her water aerobics class, a class she did not attend, because her mobility was far better than she pretended, a fact I had confirmed with the instructor weeks ago, I showed Alina the emails, the fake accounts, the manuscript submissions. I showed her the psychiatric evaluations I had secretly obtained, proving my mother was of sound mind and fully capable of understanding her actions. I showed her the deed to the house, in my name, the legal documents that made me not a guest in my mother's home but her landlord. Alina read everything. She did not cry. She got very quiet, the way she does when she is planning, and then she said, "What do you need me to do?" "Be there," I said. "Witness it, so she can't say I made it up. so she can't say I'm paranoid or unstable or any of the things she's told people I am. And the others, my agent needs to know why I disappeared. Dr. Holloway needs to explain that her stroke was never as severe as she claimed. And you, I took her hand. You need to see that I'm still here, that she didn't erase me. Elena squeezed my fingers. She never could. The dinner was on Saturday. I cooked my mother's favorite meal. Roast chicken, herbed potatoes, the chocolate cake she claimed my father had proposed over, though I had since learned from my aunt that he had proposed in a parking lot after a concert, and that my mother had cried because she thought the ring was too small. I set the table with her good china. The wedding china she had always refused to let me use as a child because I was clumsy. I lit candles. I put on a dress she had always liked, the navy blue one that made me look, in her words, almost presentable. My mother came downstairs at 6, moving with her practiced limp, her hand pressed to her chest, the picture of fragile recovery. She stopped when she saw the table. "What's this? A dinner party," I said. "I thought it was time we had some guests. You've been so lonely. I don't like surprises, Sloane, you know that." "I do," I said, and I smiled. "But I think you'll like this one." The doorbell rang at 6:15. I answered it. Elena, my agent Marcus, a man with kind eyes and a memory for contracts. Dr. Holloway, tall and serious, carrying a leather folder. And one more person, a court reporter, silent and professional, there to record everything. My mother's face went pale when she saw them. "Sloane, what is this? Who are these people?" "These are our guests," I said, pulling out her chair. "Please, sit." She did not sit. She stood at the head of the table, her hand gripping the chair, her eyes moving from face to face, calculating, searching for the exit. "Dr. Holloway," I said, "would you mind starting? I think my mother has some questions about her diagnosis." The doctor opened his folder. "Mrs. Vance, I understand you've been telling your daughter that your stroke was severe, that you require full-time care, and that your cognitive function has been compromised." "I never said, your medical records indicate otherwise." He pulled out a chart. "Your stroke was minor. A transient ischemic attack, fully resolved within 7 to 2 hours. Your motor function is 98% recovered. Your cognitive tests are well above average. There is no medical reason for you to require live-in care, nor is there any indication of the memory loss or confusion you've described to your daughter." My mother's grip tightened on the chair. "This is absurd. Sloane, what have you told these people?" "Nothing they didn't already know," I said. "Marcus." My agent stepped forward. He looked uncomfortable, the way he always did when there was conflict, but his voice was steady. "Mrs. Vance, I received an email 3 months ago, purportedly from Sloane, canceling her contract and stating she was no longer interested in writing. The language was not hers. I was concerned. When Sloane contacted me last week, she explained the situation. I also received a manuscript submission from an editor at Westgate Press, containing the first 3 chapters of Sloane's novel, submitted under the name V. Ashford. The writing is Sloane's. The submission was not." My mother's face had gone from pale to red, a flush climbing her neck. "This is slander. This is, Sloane, how could you do this to me? I'm your mother, I'm sick." "You're not sick," I said, and my voice was calm, the calm of a lake that has frozen over. "You never were. You exaggerated your symptoms to get me here. You burned my notebooks because you wanted to eliminate the original. You sent my work to publishers under a fake name because you wanted to be the writer I am, the writer you never had the discipline to become. You emailed my girlfriend, my agent, my publisher, pretending to be me, sabotaging my life so that I would have nowhere to go but back to you." I walked to the sideboard. I opened the drawer. I pulled out the stack of papers I had printed, the emails, the medical records, the manuscript submissions, and I dropped them on the table in front of her. "You wanted to own my reflection," I said. "You wanted to be the only mirror I looked into. But mirrors show the truth, Mom, and the truth is that you are not a sick woman who needs her daughter. You are a cruel woman who needs a prisoner." She looked at the papers. She looked at me. And then she did something I had not expected. She laughed. "Oh, Sloane," she said, and her voice was different now, stripped of the fragility, the limp, the wounded queen. It was hard and sharp and real. "You think this is a victory? You think bringing your little friends here, waving papers around, changes anything? I am your mother. I raised you. I own the story of your life, and no amount of court reporters or doctors or," she looked at Elena, her lip-curling, "girlfriends is going to change that." She picked up the manuscript submission, crumpled it in her hand. "You want to be a writer? Fine, write. But everyone in this town knows what you are. They know you're unstable. They know you abandoned your mother when she was dying." "I made sure of that, did you?" I asked. "Because I made sure of something else." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the deed. I placed it on top of the papers, smooth and official, my name in black ink. This house, I said, is mine. I bought it 3 years ago. You are not a homeowner recovering from a stroke. You are a tenant. And as of tomorrow, this house is being converted into a residential care facility. A legitimate one with real nurses, real doctors, and real patients who actually need help. You will be its first resident. Her face went blank. You can't, I can, I have, the paperwork is filed. The staff is hired. You will have a room, medical care, and 3 hours of supervised activity per day. You will not have access to phones, computers, or mail without supervision, because the court has granted me power of attorney based on your documented history of financial manipulation and identity theft. I leaned forward. I looked into her green eyes, the ones I did not have, the ones that had watched me for 3 to 4 years and seen only what they wanted to see. You wanted me to take care of you, I said, and I will. I will make sure you are safe and fed and comfortable. I will make sure you have everything you need, but you will not have me. You will not have my work. You will not have my life. You will sit in this house, in the room that used to be mine, and you will look at the walls. And you will remember that the only thing you ever truly owned was the story you told about me. And now even that is gone. She slapped me. It was fast and hard, and it turned my head. The court reporter made a note. Elena stepped forward, but I held up my hand. It's okay, I said. I've had worse. I turned back to my mother. She was breathing hard, her face twisted, the mask completely gone, the monster underneath finally visible. It was almost a relief to see her as she was. To stop pretending that the cruelty was confusion, that the malice was illness. I hate you, she said. I know, I said. You always did. You just needed me to hate myself more. I walked to the door. I opened it. The night air was cool and it smelled like rain, and I could hear the sound of my own heart beating, steady and strong, and finally mine. Goodbye, Mom, I said. She did not answer. She stood at the head of the table, surrounded by the people who had seen her as she was, surrounded by the papers that proved what she had done, and for the first time in my life I did not feel sorry for her. I did not feel guilty. I felt free. That was a year ago. I live in Chicago now in an apartment with windows that face the lake. Elena lives with me. We fight sometimes about dishes, about deadlines, about whose turn it is to walk the dog we adopted from a shelter, but we fight clean, with words that do not leave scars, and we make up with coffee and long walks and the understanding that love is not a trap. I finished the novel. It is called The Mirror's Daughter, and it is about a girl who grows up in a house where the mother cannot see her own reflection, so she tries to steal her daughters. It is not a happy book. It is a true book. And it is mine, every word, every comma, every period. My mother is still in the house on Maple Street. I visit once a month, because the facility requires it, and because some part of me, the part that is still 12 years old and wants her to love me, cannot let go completely. She does not speak to me. She sits in her room in the blue bedroom that was once mine, and she looks at the wall where I have hung a single framed page, the dedication of my book. For my mother, who taught me that the only way to survive a house of mirrors is to break the glass. She stares at it. She does not read it, but she stares, and I like to think that somewhere, in the parts of her she has never let me see, she understands. I am Sloane. I am 34 years old. I am a writer, a daughter, a survivor. I am no longer the girl who screams into pillows. I am the woman who writes the screams down, who turns them into sentences, who builds houses out of the broken glass and invites people in. See you in the next story.